So I hope that you too will make an attempt to get a copy of that book and read it and learn from it, inshallah. So without further ado, let me have the pleasure of inviting Port Jonathan Brown to the stage to deliver his talk entitled Islam and Diversity, Lessons from Muhammad's Compassionate Life. Port Jonathan Brown, please.
Okay. Phone, passport, don't let me forget this. Pen, wallet. I just can't say having things in my pocket. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thanks very much for inviting me to Singapore. Thanks very much for inviting me to Muis. And thanks very much for coming. The students who listened to me talk, or whatever I did, teach for a couple of days, thank you for attending, and I hope it was beneficial for you. Watch, don't let me forget that. This picture obviously was not taken, well, it was taken a little while ago. But it's hot in Washington, and I thought my hair was really long, and I figured it was going to be hot in Singapore, and in fact, at least a couple of the days here it was hot. So I decided I would cut all my hair off, and instead I just really confused people because they don't recognize me. But I was able to wear the Psalm quote, is that how you say it? Which I wore yesterday when I taught, and then I took a picture of myself and I put it on Facebook, and then my 2-year-old son said, according to my wife, "That looks like Baba." In fact, it was me. So, I'm going to read a talk, which I actually don't do very often. I only do that because I think it's, when you go to another country, you really should be extremely formal and careful about how you speak. This isn't my country where I can just speak more in a relaxed way and know how everyone's going to react. So I really wanted to make sure that I pick my words carefully. Today I was walking in a shopping mall near my hotel, and I went into a bookstore, and I was looking around and I saw a fascinating little book called The Xenophobe's Guide to Americans. I don't know, I've never seen these before. It's like The Xenophobe's Guide to Norwegians, The Xenophobe's Guide to Chinese, Xenophobe's Guide to America. A little book. I didn't buy it because I got lazy. But I flipped through it, and I found one line that was really apt. It said, Americans are convinced that the world could not possibly function without their presence. Americans are convinced that the world could not possibly function without their presence. And I took this to mean that Americans are always assuming that people want them to offer advice. And although I am American, I've traveled enough and been humbled enough by others to realize that my advice is not always wanted, and it's often not very good. But the fact before us is that I've been asked to give this speech on the lessons from Muhammad's compassionate life, so I've got to say something. You might wonder why I've started out talking about advice when the topic is a historical one, but my distinguished host actually preempted my point, which just means that, I know, great minds think alike, or average minds think alike, I don't know, we can discuss this later. The answer is simple. Why am I talking about advice when we're talking about history? The answer is simple. Before I studied Arabic, my first major in college was Russian. My dad's family comes from Russia, at least part of it. And I haven't spoken Russian for a while, but there's a saying, a Russian saying from Soviet times, "Urasi ne predskazayumaya proslya," which you all understand, obviously. That means Russia has an unpredictable past. Russia has an unpredictable past. Of course, the irony is, right, the past is not unpredictable. The past has already happened. It's the future that's unpredictable. Why is this? This is not just true for Russia. This is true in general for all pasts everywhere. The past is unpredictable not because it's not set in stone or because it can't be known. The past is unpredictable because it's vast. The past is unpredictable because it is vast. It is a boundless sea of diversity from which any image can be conjured, any picture painted, any message delivered. To quote one of my favorite movies, Big Trouble in Little China. Has anyone ever seen this movie? Anybody? I'm just curious. Big Trouble in Little China. Yes. Big Trouble in Little China. This Chinese sage says, in China we have Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism. It's kind of like we take what we want and leave the rest. It's kind of like your American salad bar, right? So the past is like a salad bar. You pick what you want, when you want. When we speak about the past, we are making choices, and we make those choices with something specific in mind. When we speak about the past, we are invoking it, we are using it as an argument for the present and for how the future should be shaped. So it's best to be honest about what we're doing. It's best to be honest about what I'm doing. I'm an American Muslim, so I'll speak as an American Muslim. And I'll speak mostly about, mainly about the past with an eye to my own country. You can choose what you find useful from what I say and leave out what you find useless or even worse, boring. In my country today, one of the problems with being in a hotel away from my family is I actually have time to watch TV, have the news on, and I get really depressed. In my country today, compassion is in short supply, and in no place more so than in politics. In fact, no place more so than in the White House itself. Indeed, that house seems to be overflowing with the total opposite of compassion, namely rancor and vindictiveness. The motto of Donald Trump and his family is loyalty. And what loyalty means to him is that anyone who has disagreed with him, questioned him, competed with him, or worst of all, publicly damaged his immense but fragile ego, these people can expect no compassion at all. A teenage girl who asked him a question at a campaign event, she asked him if he was a friend to women. She was subjected to a mass Twitter attack led by the soon-to-be president, a teenage girl. As we speak, Trump's Attorney General, former Senator Jeff Sessions, is being attacked by the president and his supporters for daring to take the basic ethical step of recusing himself from an investigation, the investigation into Trump's alleged ties to Russia, instead of violating clear ethical norms by loyally obeying the president's desire for the investigation to be shut down. And just so you know this, Jeff Sessions is not exactly a widely respected moral person, okay? He's pretty much the most conservative senator he was, and he's basically wants the Confederacy to return. I mean, he's really a lot of Americans. So if he's calling out an ethical violation, or if you're upset about his ethics, that means you're pretty far off the ethical path. This conduct coming from the President of the United States is so disturbing and disappointing, not because it's an exceptional ethical failing, but because it's in fact an ordinary personal one. The only thing that makes it exceptional is that we assume that the President is aware that his personal reactions should not govern policies. Sadly, Donald Trump is unable to separate his personal ego from his responsibilities as the president of a superpower and the leader of some 310 million people. Almost every one of us, probably even within the last month, maybe even the last week, maybe the last day, has said to themselves, "Oh, so-and-so wants my help. No way. I'm not going to help them after what they did to me." Or, "I'll never talk to so-and-so again or work with them after what they said to me." We are frequently tempted to indulge such self-righteousness and vindictiveness because it seems like we're justified. In fact, we often are actually justified. If someone has insulted you, really, or wronged you, really, then why should you talk to them? Why should you treat them politely? Why should you offer them aid if they ask for it? But we don't expect that from our leaders because they're supposed to transcend personal grievances and be responsible for something bigger and greater than themselves. And this is what we see in the example of our beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. We find that instead of anger at insult, he reacted with forbearance or care. Instead of outrage at egregious misconduct towards him personally, we see that he reacted by educating. As a leader, he always calculated not just the principled reality of his actions, but also how they would be perceived. And he realized that this perception could matter much more than his own pride or personal standing. He also understood that personal compassion cannot block a leader from guaranteeing justice and protecting those rights of those he or she leads. During the last few days, I've taught many hours of classes and spoken to and heard from many young Singaporeans and some not so young Singaporeans and some old Singaporeans, students and scholars alike, about matters of law. And this is what Muslims so often speak about. They often speak about law because we believe that God gave us a law to help guide us and to aid us. And also because in a world in which communal morals and traditions are fragmenting all around us, for Muslims and non-Muslims alike, law is often only the austere and rigid language of law that survives to order our relationships. Right? For Muslims and non-Muslims alike, it's often only the austere and rigid language of law that survives to order our relationships. I was fascinated by the topic of the theme for this year, which is in a de-globalizing world. This is really insightful. We don't have conferences that are this insightfully titled. MashaAllah, I was really impressed by this idea. But as Aristotle observed long ago, logic, law, and arguments rarely convince anybody. It is often more who a person is, ethos, or how they make you feel, pathos, that convinces you, which is bad news for scholars like me who believe in the power of ideas. So the Quran taught Muslims that, as they argued against the pagan ways of the Arabs around them, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيُسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Do not curse those who call, who invoke, who worship other than God, because they might curse God, they might curse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of enmity and without knowledge. You know their gods are false, you know their idols are false, you know what they're doing is shirk, that it's hated in God's eyes, but don't curse their gods, because this will just make them angry. And instead of listening to you, they'll hate what you believe, instead of thinking about what you believe, exploring what you believe, and eventually accepting what you believe. In a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, we hear the words of Safwan ibn Umayyah, one of the staunchest enemies of Islam from the Meccan elite, who fought the Prophet ﷺ until the bitter end. Instead of punishing the defeated leaders of the Meccan enemy, the Prophet gave them back their standing and won them over as loyal Muslims. Al-mu'allafa qulubuhum al-mutallaqun. Safwan recalls that whereas once the Prophet had been the most hated person to him, he soon became ahabb an-nas ilayya, the most beloved person to me, in Sahih Bukhari. In a world in which, sounds like a movie introduction, in a time of war, in a world in which we see so much wrong around us and so much ignorance, our justified and often completely understandable outrage can lead us to forget that in our interactions with others, it is almost always better to educate than to punish. I think one of my favorite incidents in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is the story of the Bedouin who, let's just say, misused the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. This hadith is very well attested. It appears in the Sahihain and many other hadith collections. An A'rabi, a Bedouin, comes into the Prophet's mosque in Medina, where the Prophet and some of his companions are sitting. He prays 2 rak'ah, so he's already a Muslim, but maybe not very well educated. And he says aloud, Allahumma arhamni wa Muhammadan wa la tarham ma'ahu ahada. Oh God, have mercy on me, have mercy on Muhammad, and nobody else. The Prophet laughs and he says, لَقَدْ تَحَرْجَرْتَ وَاسِعًا. You have made narrow what is wide, namely the mercy of God. Then the Bedouin gets up and starts peeing on the side of the mosque. This is good. This made me feel good because, this is, not even I do this much bad stuff at a dinner party. I can always see my wife, I start saying something. 15 minutes later, something else. Eventually I just leave because it's just gonna get worse and worse. But this guy exceeded even my capacity to commit faux pas. The Bedouin gets up and starts peeing on the side of the mosque. The companions are outraged, screaming at the man. But the Prophet calms them. We have been sent to bring ease, not hardship, he says. Then the Prophet tells them, let him finish. La tazrumu da'u. Let him finish urinating. Don't interrupt him. Then he calls the Bedouin over and says, this mosque is not for urinating. Ma buniya hadha al-masjid lihada. Rather, it was built for the remembrance of God and for prayer. Then the Prophet calls for water to be poured on the spot to clean the urine. After the Bedouin understood all of this, he tells Abu Hurairah, who narrated the hadith, by my father and mother, he did not scold or curse me. By my father and mother, he did not scold or curse me. So instead of anger, the Prophet chose to educate an ignorant person, and he won his immense respect and loyalty. How many of us, by the way, have failed such tests? I was really heartbroken the other day. I was in San Antonio, Texas, and a woman who was a convert to Islam told me that she brought another woman who just became Muslim and to do her shahada. And while she's doing the shahada, this sort of older Muslim lady started tapping her hands like this and pointing to the woman's fingernails and saying, basically, you can't have fingernail polish on. You can't have fingernail polish on. Man, imagine there's someone who's just becoming Muslim, right? We need to think about this. Think about stuff. It's easy to scold people. It's easy to scold people. And it makes you feel good because you know more than them and you're a better person than them. But it's not helping them. Maybe sometimes it does. Maybe sometimes you do have to scold your children. Maybe sometimes you have to be angry at people. But how often does that just drive people away? It was not always easy for the Prophet ﷺ to transcend the personal reactions that all human beings have. In another hadith in Sahih Bukhari, after the Prophet ﷺ had apportioned out the spoils of a battle, one man complained to his friends privately. This apportioning was not done seeking the pleasure of God. This apportionment was not done to please God. When the Prophet heard this, someone told him this man had been saying this. The narrator of the hadith says, he grew angry such that I could see anger in his face. Then he said, may God bestow mercy on Moses, for he was afflicted by worse than this, and he was patient in adversity. So the Prophet hears another man privately telling people that the Prophet had not divided things fairly, he'd done so for some other reason, and this makes him so angry. But what does he do? He immediately remembers the example of Moses ﷺ, and how he'd been afflicted and tried by even worse from his community, and he had borne this with sabr. But we must not forget that compassion can be harmful and destructive if it undermines justice. Compassion that is unevenly and inequitably handed out becomes injustice and breeds resentment. So the Prophet famously said that even if his own daughter Fatima, even if she were caught stealing, he would punish her for theft. And when people in positions of authority react, they often do so in their official capacity, not out of personal grievance. So when the Prophet was adjudicating a dispute over water distribution between Zubair ibn al-Awwam, an early Muslim convert, and another Muslim, And he ruled in favor of Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, a distant relative of his. The other man accused the Prophet of nepotism. Ibn Ammik Hada, is this your nephew, your cousin? He did this, I think, the Prophet did this, I think, not out of anger, the Prophet responded by increasing the amount of water he had awarded to Zubair. So he gave, instead of ruling in favor of Zubair and giving him a certain amount of water, gave him even more water. He did this, I think, not out of anger, but because the man had called into question the Prophet's basic commitment to justice in judgment, and he'd done so publicly, so he publicly undermined his capacity as a judge. So this is, we can imagine what we would have, at least in the United States, it's called contempt of court. Right? If you don't, you can criticize the judge's judgment outside of court, you can complain, you can appeal, et cetera. But in the court, to question the judge's judgment is not to personally insult the judge, it's to insult the very institution of justice and the reliability of getting that in a society. And sometimes it's not compassion, but a subtle understanding of the larger pieces in motion that led the Prophet to be merciful or punitive. It was the committed efforts of Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf to recruit people to go and fight the Muslims during their war with the Meccans. It was this, his efforts as a recruiter for the enemy, that led the Prophet to order a mission to have Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf killed. Sometimes people say he had him killed because he was insulting the Prophet. This is not accurate. And if you go back to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and many scholars, they say, no, Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf was an enemy combatant who was actually recruiting people to go and swear oaths that they were going to go and fight the Muslims in Medina. And when the Prophet decided not to punish an Arab sorcerer who had tried to cast a spell on him, and when he decided not to punish those hypocrites in Medina who were trying to undermine his leadership in the city, it was because the Prophet did not want to stir up further intertribal animosity, or for people to say, as he said, that Muhammad kills his companions. So he was aware of what the image would be, and what that would mean for the capacity to maintain the tribal alliances he was leading, both inside Medina and outside Medina, that he did not punish people who were attacking him and insulting him and undermining him. There is, sadly, as far as I can see, little on the horizon to suggest that we Muslims will not be confronted by even more ignorance about our religion, by even more misguided and unjustified hatred towards our community, and will be confronted with plenty of chances to act on our quite understandable rage. We will have many more chances to potentially act on our quite understandable rage. But we should remember the example of our Prophet ﷺ. Like him, this transcends the personal. To draw on American relationship jargon, it's not about you. It's not about me. We have a mission to educate and enlighten others, and we can't do so with books and facts and arguments alone, sadly. We need to take the higher path. We need to inspire people and draw them in with compassion and a desire to educate. I'll end with one final example from the life of the Prophet, ﷺ. Because realizing that you're serving a cause greater than your own pride, or a cause greater than getting your own rights or getting justice, this entails something else very important. It entails working with others who share the same objective, however much you or I or we disagree with them, and however valid the causes for that disagreement is. When negotiating the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Prophet's companions asked him what concessions he'd make with the enemies of Islam. And for any of you who don't know, that during the lengthy war between the Muslims in Medina and the Meccan enemies of Islam in Mecca, at a certain point they signed a treaty which was supposed to go for 10 years and would allow Muslims to go and perform pilgrimage in Mecca, and there would be other concessions on both sides in order to keep the peace. This is called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Prophet replied, لا يسألوني خطة يعظمون فيه حرمات الله إلا أعطيتهم إياه. لا يسألوني خطة يعظمون فيها حرمات الله إلا أعطيتهم إياها. They will not ask me for anything that they would use to magnify those sacred things of God, those things revered by God, except that I would give them that. This is prophetic style of speech, translated into English stylistically. Anything they ask me for, if that thing glorifies God, I'll give it to them. And discussing this hadith, I really like to draw on one scholar who people don't quote a lot, or at least not in some parts of the world, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the Central Arabian scholar who died in 1792 and the founder of what is sometimes called the Wahhabi movement. The reason I like to use him in discussing this hadith is, if you like Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, you'll accept what I'm saying. And if you don't like him, you can't accuse him of being some kind of liberal softy, right? Who's trying to promote some kind of soft, fluffy, modernist Islam. So this is Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab speaking now. I'm going to quote him. He says, this hadith is proof that al-mushrikeen wa ahl al-fujur إذا طلبوا أمرا يعظمون به حرمة من حرمات الله أجيبوا إليه وإن منع غيره فيعنونه على تعظيم ما فيه حرمات الله لا على كفرهم وبغيهم ويمنعون مما سوى ذلك فمن التمس المعاونة على محبوب لله تعالى أجيب إلى ذلك كائن من كان ما لم يترتب على ذلك المحبوب مبغوض لله أعظم منه. What does that mean? He says, this hadith is evidence that the polytheists, the pagans, and those sinful people, if they ask for something in which they are actually glorifying something revered by God, they should be given that thing. Even if you deny them other things, and even if they deny you other things. Give them that thing with which they glorify God. Don't help them do things that you don't agree with. Don't help them do things that are hateful to you, but help them do things that glorify God. And if someone seeks aid in something that is loved by God, give it to them. Help them with that. No matter who they are, sinful or not sinful, as long as that's not being used for something that is more hated by God than that thing. So if someone, you can imagine, someone who is a sinful person, or to totally agree with them on religious issues, if they say, help me go and feed a poor person, you should help them. If someone says, help me go and make the city a safer place, you should help them. If someone says, help me go and fight for the right of the oppressed, you should help them. These are all things that magnify God, and that things that God reveres, that God loves. Compromise is always tricky. Compromise is always tricky. And at least in the United States, the questions that face Muslims today, and that have faced Muslims in the recent past, are always questions of compromise. How much are you willing to compromise of what you think is right, either in your religion or what you think is politically right or morally right? How much are you willing to compromise those things in order to please some other group, or in order to join in an alliance, or in order to have good relationships? And one of the problems that I've found Muslims in the United States, consistently with Muslims in the United States, isn't that they're not principled. Being principled is relatively easy. I don't mean that it's, you can just wake up in the morning and be principled. What I mean is that if you say, I have a rule and I'm going to follow this rule no matter what, you don't really have to think anymore. You just say, this is what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do anything else, no subtlety. Muslims tend to be pretty good, at least in the United States, at being principled. They don't tend to be very good at being smart. They don't tend to be very good at being smart. I'm talking about Muslims in the United States, not here, right? sure Singaporean Muslims are all very intelligent. I don't mean that Muslims in America they're not educated, they're very educated. I don't mean they don't have a lot of gigahertz in their brain, they have tons of gigahertz in their brain. What I mean is they don't think intelligently about questions of politics. And by here I don't mean, do you vote for the Democrats or the Republicans? I mean, how do you think about people's interactions with each other? How do you think about communities' negotiations over distribution of resources? How do you think about pursuing an objective? How do you think about building alliances? How do you think about what other people are asking of you? What are they really asking you? If they're asking for this, are they really asking for that? Are they asking for something else that this is going to lead to? Thinking not just two-dimensionally, three-dimensionally. Thinking not just about right now, but what this could lead to in the future. What is it likely to lead to? What is it unlikely to lead to? And subhanAllah, what I find fascinating about the life of the Prophet, alayhi salam, is his incredible sophistication. His incredible sophistication about political thinking. And political thinking is not usually principled, not because politicians are unprincipled in America, a lot of them are, but because it's not about principles. We can say we want justice. We can say we want to help people. We can say we want to reduce crime. We can say we want to promote peace. We can say we want to promote, religious liberty or things like that. We can all agree on those things. How do you actually get to those things? How do you actually implement policies? How do you make choices between something you really want, something you sort of want? How do you prioritize? These are political choices. How do you fashion relationships? How do you build trust? These are political questions. They're hard. They're not based on principles. They're based on intelligent reflection on human nature, on the nature of your community. And compromise is a hard thing. And I'll just bring up the end with just a couple of examples of compromise from the life of the Prophet which fascinate me. And God help American Muslims. Sometimes I really want to pull my hair out, but I can't do that anymore unless I get tweezers. Anything that comes up with American Muslims, anytime there's any question. For example, after the inauguration of our President Donald Trump, there's this prayer breakfast, national prayer breakfast. And an imam was asked to go and do a dua at the prayer. At the same time, a Muslim woman was one of the leaders of the largest public march in American history, the Women's March. They were sitting there protesting Donald Trump and what he stood for. Now, it may have been the right thing for that imam to go to that mosque and do that prayer, or go to the prayer breakfast and do it. I actually don't think that's that big a deal. I mean, we could sit and disagree. Reasonable people could disagree about whether this is the right thing to do or not. What I find shocking was the explanation offered. And it's always the same thing with American Muslims. Even the Prophet talked to his enemies. Treaty of Hudaybiyah, even the Prophet talked to his enemies. That's the answer for everything? The Prophet talked to his enemies, so you can go and do something horrible and sell out something horribly. You justify that by saying the Prophet talked to his enemies. Or you can go and have a very sensible, effective, principled discussion with the group, and you also use the same excuse. This is unsubtle thinking. Let's look at how the Prophet talked to his enemies at Islam. Let's look at, when he goes to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, his companions ask him, what would you give? What concessions would you make to the enemy? And he says, anything they want that magnifies those things revered by God, I will give them. There's one thing. Another thing, they're sitting there writing the document. Ali bin Abi Talib is the Prophet's secretary. And he says, this is between Muhammad, the messenger of God, and the leaders of Quraysh. And the leaders of Quraysh say, no. Not messenger of God. We don't accept that. And you can imagine what bigger thing are Muslims asked to compromise than to say that Muhammad is not a messenger of God. This is part of our shahada. Of course, he would never compromise on this. No, he immediately compromised. Why? Let's think intelligently. His opponents don't think he's a messenger of God. He's not compromising on this claim with those people who do think he's a messenger. He's compromising with people who already reject that idea. Why insist on it? It gains nothing in the document. It means nothing to them. But then let's look at another instance in which the Prophet is offered an alliance toward the end of his career. Musaylama from the Hanif, I think from the Bani Hanifa tribe comes. Another claimant to prophecy. He says he's the prophet. He comes, this is in Sahih Bukhari, he comes to Medina and he meets the Prophet. And the Prophet meets him outside of the city and he has a reed in his hand, a long reed. And Musaylama says, I'll come and aid you in your wars. I'll help you. I'll be the prophet after you die. Let's think politically. Maybe you could say, well, when the time comes, we'll ignore his, we'll say we're going to do this, and then when it comes time to it, we'll just renege on our agreement. In the meantime, we'll take advantage of his manpower, we'll use this to help our cause. The Prophet said, I wouldn't even give you this reed for that demand. Because now he's being asked to publicly state that there's going to be a prophet after him. He's stating this to his companions, and more than that, he's stating that to the whole world, to the followers of Musaylama, to all these other people, to renege or to contradict one of the fundamental principles, something that is axiomatically known as part of our religion, that the last prophet to come to mankind is the Prophet Muhammad. And finally, just one last example, because I find it so interesting. When the Muslims are going off during the war with the Meccans, they're going off on a campaign. There's this great warrior, this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, a great warrior who's not Muslim. He wants to join them. For honor, for spoils of war, because he likes it, who knows. And how much could the Muslims have used this man's help? What does the Prophet say? We don't accept help from non-Muslims. Man goes away. But he really wants to go on this fight. Why? Who knows? He comes back and he offers again, let me go with you. No, we don't accept help from non-Muslims. Comes back again. No, we don't accept help from non-Muslims. Finally, he comes back again. He says, okay, I'll become Muslim. This is interesting because this takes real insight. The type of insight I don't have. The type of judgment I don't have. The Prophet understood, if he just agrees with this person, he's going to come, he's going to fight, and he's going to leave as a non-Muslim. But by pushing him, I say, no, we're not going to accept you. He pushed the guy to take the step to become Muslim. This is insight, right? So we have in the life of the Prophet ﷺ answers to help us think about this very tricky question of compromise. Can Muslims compromise on important things? Yes, sometimes. Should Muslims compromise on important things? Yes, sometimes. Should Muslims think in a sophisticated way about these issues? Yes, definitely. And we have a great model in the person of the Prophet. Jazakumullah khair. I guess I'm supposed to answer questions?
Yeah, you may join.
Oh, okay.
Unless you...
No, I got everything here. Passport, phone, watch.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mount. Brief, but yes, succinct, and examples given are just few of the many examples. And I thought the concluding remark is very apt, it's very important. The challenge is really, and I can really relate to that statement. It's not about being principled, but it's really about the skills, the wisdom to compromise. And compromise itself is a big word. And it takes really a great deal of wisdom and insight. Obviously, Prophet Muhammad is the most wise person on earth, we believe. And he was able to do that. Well, that closing remark really opens up for discussions. So you're most welcome to come forward to the aisle. We've got microphones here. My colleagues around will hand you the microphone. If I can collect a few questions, 3 questions at one go, that will save some time. So can I invite first participants to have any question or comment?
happened yesterday. Oh, someone's ready?
Yeah, I saw Huda. Huda, please, can you please hand the mic to Huda? She's in the middle of that. It's very difficult for her to leave the seat. Can I see second hand?
What happened yesterday is that nobody asked questions until the last 2 minutes of the event, and everyone had questions.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much, Professor Brown, for your very insightful sharing session. My name is Huda. I'm from the Middle East Institute of Singapore. My question is about what we face as Muslims in Singapore. We have been advised time and again to be not to be concerned about things that happens overseas because they will, not to be concerned too much with whatever that happens overseas because relatively we Muslims here are safe. We can practice our religion freely. But that's a dilemma in the sense that we are supposed to be compassionate human beings, like the Prophet was. So, is there any sort of hadith or examples that we can follow, or what advice can you give us, Muslims here?
Hadith of not being concerned of what?
What to do when we are? We have been advised by time and again by the leadership of the country not to be concerned too much. Peace.
So, like I said, I'm American, and apparently we don't think the world can exist without our presence. Write this book, Xenophobes Guide to Americans. But I really, there's an Arabic saying, "Ya gharib kun adib." It's a good guest should be polite. Right? And what I mean by that is that I don't know enough about Singapore. I don't know about life in Singapore to sit and kind of tell you how you should react to these kind of questions. What I would say is that we don't find political questions, and when I mean by political questions, I don't mean, do you vote for this person or that person, just sort of politics and the mundane sense. What I mean is thinking about these incredibly complicated, intricate, localized issues that are so far below the level of principle. What I mean by that is it's, we can sit and agree, for example, it's important, you should care about other people. You should try and stop suffering, right? You should try and do justice. But how do you actually carry that out? For example, if you're a small country like Singapore, how do you help people overseas? What's the best way to do that? What kind of support could you offer? Sometimes, for example, in the United States, I usually, as a public intellectual or something, I generally talk, my rule is, I'll talk about issues that the American government or American citizens have real capacity to influence. Otherwise, I don't really talk about things too much because it's not useful. But sometimes, you can be helpful just by letting someone out there know that you care. Sometimes, even if you can't do anything, just writing a statement on Facebook and saying, we're thinking about these people who are suffering there. I mean, yeah, it doesn't help them, but sometimes this is what people really care about. It's hard to know. How do you help people abroad? This is something, in the United States, our country does a lot of harm, more than, it helps some, it does a lot of harm. And so, for Americans, it's kind of easy, right? You sort of go and try and do your best to convince people not to support a certain policy. Don't send bombs here, don't bomb that, don't shoot that. Other countries have a much different role in the world, and I don't know exactly what the best way for a Singaporean to aid other people is.
Yes, is there any particular hadith pertaining with that?
Not that I know of, but then again, I'm just I'm a professor. I'm not half of the also. Some people memorize hundreds of thousands of hadith. But I would just say that sometimes I think we we look to the wrong place, right? So if there's a question of, how do I deal with, let's say, this neighborhood council meeting about whether or not we're going to get a certain kind of storm drain or something. I mean, there's not going to be a hadith that has information. This is am I going to, let's say there's there's an example in the United States, right? So, or here, this is a great example. It's happened just today. For the past several years, let's say decade, right? The group that has consistently supported Muslims and the rights of Muslims to be included, to not be discriminated against, to not suffer at the hands of law enforcement, has been gay rights groups, consistently. A lot of Muslims are really uncomfortable with that. They're not comfortable with working with these groups for obvious reasons. Now the Trump administration seems like it's going to start reintroducing discrimination laws against gays and transsexuals, LGBT groups, right? What are Muslims going to do? What are Muslims going to do? You could say, amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, and you can say that's my principle, and it's easy. This is munkar. I'm never going to help these people. But then you think, what is it that what is it they really want? Do they want me to affirm their lifestyle, or do they want me to support them, not be discriminated against? I also don't want to be discriminated against. And the people who think they're monsters also think I'm a monster. So we have common cause, we have common objective. They don't ask me to agree with what they do. I don't ask them to believe in my religion. We're like people in a lifeboat who need to row. And I'm not going to say, I'm not going to row because you're gay. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to row because you're Muslim. So this is a perfect example. This kind of stuff just happened today. Muslims are now going to be in a position in the United States to ask themselves this question. We're going to be asked, are you going to support us against being LGBT groups, against discrimination? And this is going to be a big debate, no doubt, amongst American Muslims.
Thank you, Professor. I see a hand out there, yes?
Assalamu alaikum. Mohammed Sanan from the School of International Studies. Regarding your quote on Aristotle, where you said that people are more, they're convinced not by logic but by emotional appeal. My question over there is that, for example, you write for the Yaqeen Institute. I've read one of your articles, and it's really long, but it's a really good read, and a lot of people should ideally read these sort of articles to get the truth out. But the problem is that no one's going to be convinced because a lot of people don't take the time out to read such long articles in general, right? And how do people trying to inform the public, for example, in the age where Islamophobes generally pull out a lot of misinformation against Islam, right? And it's all over the internet and stuff like that. Considering the Prophet's life, because he said that I was blessed with comprehensive speech, how do we balance between bringing out logical things, but then at the same time not making it so long and boring that people don't like what you're saying?
So you're saying what I write is long and boring. I know you're gonna say that. I'll answer your question, but actually I just want to say something because I'm afraid that I don't want to create a false impression. So you might be sitting there saying, oh, Professor Brown, he's just a super, liberal guy, he's telling us to do all the super liberals. In the United States, other Muslims are always saying how uncompromising I am. A lot of time I spent the last couple of years, hammering Muslims who compromise on things they shouldn't. So when I talk about compromise, you're hearing it from somebody who's not the first guy in line to compromise. I want to be clear about it, because I don't want you to have this impression that because I'm a white guy, I'm wearing a suit and tie, that somehow I'm always, pushing some kind of a white, Western agenda or something like that. Okay, you can go online and find all sorts of people say horrible stuff about me, and you entertain yourself with endless pages of Google items about how I'm some kind of lunatic or something. But per your question, so obviously I think argument works, and I think it's important. It works for some people, and it's important to have, because let's say there's 100 people, 200 people in this room, okay? Let's say 15 of them can understand an argument and are convinced by it, right? Those 15 people might have a lot of friends, and those 15 people, some of them might be a lot better at personal communication than I am, but it might be some of them might be really influential, imams or teachers or something, and they can go and talk to people. And kind of the ideas and the arguments don't get passed on in their exact same form. They get distilled and they trickle down into a larger group of people. Another thing that we do at Yaqeen is we do these the green screen video. I don't know if they put them out yet. I've done a bunch of them. It's really hard. You stand in front of this green screen, you have to look really charming and speak clearly and not make any mistakes. And they have all sorts of like cartoon stuff happening behind you to take an 8,000 word article and make it into 30-second video. Right? And then you have these like tweet sections and stuff that gets tweeted out. So you're completely right, which is that you can't just create these long form articles and I think it's going to change the world. But that's why, when Sheikh Omar Suleiman came and talked to me about joining Yaqeen, he said, look, you write really good stuff, no one reads it because you're an academic and you don't know. And I said, look, I spend all sorts of nights awake thinking I'd write this stuff, it's good, no one's ever going to read it. And he said, look, we know how to do search engine optimization. So now my article on honor killing in Islam, my article on hudud in Islam, these are like number 1, 2, or 3 in Google searches if you do hudud, if you do honor killing in Islam on Google. And I've done the whole Google incognito things. They don't say that I'm just Googling on my own computer and that's why I'm doing that. I just wrote one on apostasy, inshallah it'll be, so this is the kind of, I'm just the guy who writes this stuff, one of the guys, but it's the search engine optimization and the ability to take stuff and turn it into these little videos. You're entirely right, that's what's going to actually influence a lot of people, inshallah.
I'm checking what's the way to active. I don't see whether the time machine.
Which one?
I'm googling to see whether it's still number 3.
What did you Google?
Well, probably this one doesn't.
I don't have a problem. What did you write?
Honor killing.
Well, yeah, that's right. Honor killing Islam. I don't know. I think
Okay.
honor killing Islam. That's what I entered.
Okay.
It's number 1. Look at this. It's number 1.
Down there.
It's number 1. No. Okay. Well, now you entered.
Okay, no. While Rob checks the Google whether I see a hand. Rahman, yes.
Bismillah.
Yes,
Just 2 short questions. Number 1 is, what's to prevent people, especially in this age, right, of social
Can you speak louder, Sheikh Rahman?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's number 2. Honor killing Islam. Unbelievable. You should have at least pretended. Thank God I was just when you did. I interrupted you.
Sorry. 2 short questions. Number 1 is in this social media age, right? People are interpreting hadiths and Quranic verses to their own ends, especially like, even for just now, like you quoted 2 things, right? For example, like the Bedouin who was urinating in the mosque. Some people may just see it as etiquette in the mosque, while you go further to talk about educating those who are not informed. Isolation. Number 2 is, for example, the last example that you gave, like the Prophet Muhammad said to the non-Muslim, we do not accept help from non-Muslims. People may take that as, no, Muslims should not have collaborations with non-Muslims at all. So what's to prevent people from doing that? Number 1 is, that's the question. Number 2 is, the question is, in your travels, etc., in the end, right, we put aside all the politicians and politics aside, how, in your view, can we achieve a compassionate ummah? Is there a mechanism for it? Thank you.
So you're entirely right about people, using hadiths or misunderstanding them for Quranic verses for their own ends, or because of their own biases, or because they're idiots. some names are coming to mind. One name in particular seems somehow, because I'm here, I'm thinking about it. Singapore. I think, and you're right. Even in this speech, I should have made clear that the Prophet did take aid from non-Muslims, and without such negotiations, right? So he accepted Safwan bin Umayyah, who I mentioned. The Prophet, before Safwan bin Umayyah became Muslim, the Prophet went before the Battle of Hunayn and borrowed a lot of armor from him. In fact, that's where we get the ruling on liability for bailments, for loans. Is Aghazbun hada? Are you taking this from me, or you're taking this from me by showing this? What is it? Bel ariyatun madmuna. I think that's what it says. It's in Sunan Abu Dawud. No, this is a loan that's guaranteed. If something happens to this stuff, we're going to pay you back. So the Prophet did take help from non-Muslims, and he asked not. It was no, we don't take help from non-Muslims. The point is, in the case, in the example I gave with the warrior coming, he could have just said, we do take aid from non-Muslims. In fact, I just took some from Safwan bin Umayyah. But something led him to believe that if he pushed this guy, that he was going to give more. In fact, he was going to give his allegiance to the Muslim. That's what good negotiating skills, apparently something that our president is supposed to have, but probably actually doesn't have. But you're entirely right, which is that these things can be easily misunderstood, and that's why people always ask me, what book of hadith should I read? And I say, none. Don't ever read books of hadith, because they will be too confusing for you. Because you'll be taking little particulars, little atoms from a big system, and you have to have someone who knows how to explain that system to you. So one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing is there's a project I'm the head of to translate the 6 books into English. Now that's not even the hard part. With commentary, and not a full commentary, but just to explain controversial things, to help fit a hadith into a bigger system. And it'll be online, inshallah, and people will be able to find it wherever for free.
What about the second question about what do you think ways to achieve a compassionate ummah? That's a big one.
It's hard. I can't think of on that scale. Sorry. It's too big a question.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. So I have a question relating to the example that you gave just now about how the Prophet ﷺ gave a concession to the enemies, and he said that anything that they want magnifies God. So based on the summary of the lecture, it's like between not to be too principled, but to know when to compromise at the correct timings. But what I'm looking for, or what I'm confused about probably is, like, what is the compass that we can, like, in such situations, what is that thing that we can, like, a direction for us to go? Thank you.
That's the, as they say in English, $64,000 question. And that's a big question. And I'm about to turn 40, inshallah, so I'm still young. I'm not a wise person. I'm not a very wise person. But from my understanding of the world and of our religion and of these kind of issues, is that that's exactly the kind of question where there is no answer. There is no compass. There is no rule. There's only reflection, discussion, right? Shura, nadar, investigation, and really kind of feeling out these issues. And each one will be different. And and you can see. I mean, I see this with American Muslim leaders, right? Some people have really simplistic thinking. It's just sort of binary, either this or that. You justify anything by saying the Prophet talked to his enemies, or the Prophet compromised, and they justify anything. Other people are much more refined in their thinking. I mean, maybe it's useful to give a case example. I mean, for example, there's as in America, the Israel-Palestine issue is very controversial, very, very controversial issue, and so. A lot of times there's efforts to get Muslims to compromise on, let's say, making statements about Israel-Palestine issue. And I'm really like firm on this issue. You know, it's not the business of American Muslims to compromise the rights of other people. If Palestinians say they want justice, it's not the business of American Muslims to compromise that. But for example, there was a debate over, there was this major Jewish organization in the US after the Trump election wanted to form a partnership with Muslim organizations to fight anti-Semitism and to fight Islamophobia in America. Now this group is very, very Zionist, very, very anti-Palestinian rights, right? And you could have said, no, working with them is compromising and it's unacceptable and they have awful views and they've got the things they've said. And in fact, look at the way they've spread Islamophobia in the past, which is true. But my thinking was, you know, wait a second. They say they want to fight against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, right? So that's a good cause. And if the first thing you should ask of them is, maybe you should commit yourself not to doing Islamophobic stuff anymore. And you know, as long as they don't ask you to do something that compromises your principles, then what's wrong with working with this group towards a cause that both of you agree with? So this is I don't know, I think that the best way to talk about this compass you're speaking about isn't to try and come up with a rule or even some big rules. It's to really look at a number of situations where you think people have made the right decision and to try and understand how they looked at it, how they kind of parse things, how they look at the different aspects, and to learn that kind of intelligent way of thinking about political issues.
Thank you very much. Okay, I see some hands. We've got. Let me give opportunity to the females. Sorry?
We take more than one question.
Yeah,
okay, I'll flag. Let me get from some ladies, not because. Oops. Okay, I think I should go there. Because I see that I got hand and I want to give equal representation for.
Very sensitive.
I'm trying to give a case study in Singapore in terms of how this compromise that you are talking about. Now, this is about hijab for the Muslim movement. Okay, for the past 2 decades, I would say close to 2 decades, I think our Muslims have been trying to kind of, hoping that our Muslim women can actually adorn the hijab, in public service and front desk as part of the hijab policy. But I think until now the answer is still no from the government as part of public policy. Now it comes to a point that there will be group of Muslims who feel that no, this is all right, and I think we have to keep on fighting or requesting the government to actually allow us or allow Muslim women to actually adorn the hijab. But we also have another group who feel that we do not know when this thing will finally, there's no timeline in terms of how, the Muslim will be able to give this opportunity. And so you have one who say that let's not put our resources in terms of really going ahead and keep on insisting, but let's put our resources on something that is more, of a higher importance, for us, But having made that position, then we will have this group of Muslims who say that no, that's not the right position, you're compromising your principle. Because this is supposed to be something, because in a situation where the Muslim believe that hijab, it is a compulsory, it is an obligation for the Muslim woman. So how is the compromise here?
Thank you very much. I see that as a tough question for Prof. Jonathan Brown, because this is a policy issue and Prof. Jonathan may not be apprised of some of the constitutional elements for him to make any informed advice, notwithstanding when Prof. Jonathan makes or gives a response to that, please bear in mind that he doesn't live in Singapore, which is as we clearly say, and he may not have the full picture of the issue to provide an informed advice, but we can still consider that. Notwithstanding, yeah, inshallah, we'll get. Khalid, there's one here, there's no. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Abu Bakar Siddiq, and to put my question in context, I'm a young person. In fact, I'm very young, 18 years old. I might be the youngest person in this auditorium. So my question is, how can Muslim youths exemplify compassion? How can Muslim youths exemplify compassion in their daily lives?
Okay, thank you. He's young, probably he's the youngest 18, he's still schooling, so he's asking a question, how can the Muslim exemplify? Yeah. Okay, I'll take the third one, Walid. What was that? I can't see. Oh, okay. I'll get back to you, Walid, the next one.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Iman. I just came back from America. I was staying in Chicago for a few years. So I could relate whatever you said about LGBT rights, supporting Muslim groups, about Donald Trump being, the way he is. And I just want to say, so I could relate to whatever you just said, because I experienced it myself. And so I feel for the Muslims there, I agree with you that they need to be more intelligent. Because for my own opinion, I don't think they should be out there protesting, to Donald Trump. That's just my opinion. And okay, so my question to you is, Professor, you studied the Hadith. Who was your main influence and why?
Thank you, Iman. So, what do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with exactly what Anand said. Not because I'm trying not to offend anybody or something like that, but just, I mean, really, these kind of things can really differ based on specific laws, right? The United States is very different from other European countries. But actually, this is so I'll just talk about this from an American perspective. And of course, let me say from the beginning, I'm a man, and I don't bear any of these, the consequences. My wife wears hijab, and I don't think I would have the courage to wear hijab if I were a Muslim woman in the United States. Let me just say that, I don't think I'd have the chops. So I'll offer my thinking from an American perspective because we have the exact same issue, right? The difference is that you don't, there's an employer has to accommodate religious observance, provided it's not unduly burdensome to that employer. This is effectively the American legal reasoning and the precedent of the current state of the law on this issue. So recently, about a year and a half ago, there was a big victory in the Supreme Court case where a Muslim woman sued Abercrombie and Fitch because they had not hired her because she wears hijab. And the person basically said, we're not hiring you because you wear hijab, right? So it is not unduly burdensome for Abercrombie and Fitch to have someone in their store wearing hijab. And now, in fact, stores like that want to have someone wearing hijab because now Muslims are cool, part of the resistance and all this stuff. So Muslims are cool now because Donald Trump hates them. But I think the core of the question could be applied to a lot of issues, which is this a little thing, and therefore let's compromise on this little thing and focus on the big things, or is this little thing really important, so let's not compromise on it? I think it really depends on what that little thing is. And so, for example, shaking hands with the opposite sex. This is just my opinion. I'm as an American Muslim, right? So there is disagreement. Especially in the Hanbali school, you have opinions on women who are, let's say, working in the market and stuff like that, are able to touch the hands of men and things like that. And these were rulings for what we're seeing as kind of lower class laborer women, not the elite women that a lot of the fiqh is talking about. And now we're basically all, in effect, because we're all engaged in commercial life. We all have in school and working and things like that. We're all like these people. So, on this type of issue, if you have the capacity in your tradition, you have the thinking to make these compromises, and you realize how, let's say in the United States, if you don't shake hands with someone, it really confuses them. And in theory, in theory, right, you could say, well, this gives me an opportunity to tell them about Islam, and I'm a Muslim, and we don't believe in the agenda, and I can do da'wah to the person. But you have to think about, realistically, how often is that going to happen versus the person just getting offended, and versus people really not wanting to give you that kind of time, and not wanting to have you around for that. Right? So there are other things. For example, I don't drink alcohol. Oh, really? You don't drink? Why is that? Well, I'm Muslim. Okay, well, interesting. Okay, you don't drink alcohol. It's not going to disrupt the beginning of a meeting, unless you're at like a drunk college meeting or something. But but then you say, look at something like hijab. Hijab is required, right? And in addition, you're actually not disturbing somebody, right? You're not disturbing a social interaction. This is a piece of cloth, and you have a piece of cloth in your head, or you don't have a piece of cloth in your head. And this is, I could be really interested in 1960s fashion and wear a kind of Audrey Hepburn turban or something, and no one's going to get upset about that. So what, in this case, really, it's about people asking people to accept the presence of Muslims in the public square in the U.S. Then you have to ask yourself the question: okay, so what kind of leverage do Muslims have in the U.S.? We're a tiny minority. Let's say I refuse to work for you if you don't let me wear a hijab. Okay, fine, don't work for me, I don't care. There's only like 10 of you anyway. Not going to affect it. There's no ability to boycott. So in the United States, it's really not a kind of economic force. It's really relying on the freedom of religion and the body of law and the constitutional guarantees for exercise of religion. Other countries might not have that kind of law, but maybe the Muslim population is larger and they can have other influence. Well, we want to be accommodated because we're part of the population. It's important to us. So I think it really depends on what kind of situation you're in. And then the second question was, how are the young person able to be compassionate? That's interesting. The only reason I find it, my mind sort of, where my mind goes to on that issue is in the U.S., a lot of young Muslims are kind of gravitating towards the social justice culture. And look, I love social justice, okay? I'm a big supporter. This is, to me, an important thing. But the idiom is one of outrage. Right? And so you see people, let's say some young people, instead of being compassionate or instead of being kind of calm about stuff, they go from 0 to 60 immediately, and it's like 0 to complete outrage on anything. And that's really turns people off, I think, a lot of people off. So I think the risk is that young people today, they have laudable aims, but they get so kind of caught up in this idea, this idiom of outrage, that they forget the impact this is. So it might convince some people, but it's probably going to really put a lot of people off. And so that's what I would say, is just try and avoid maybe the temptation to go from 0 to 60 on the outrage meter immediately, and try and cultivate those skills of communication, of relationship building, that will be useful not only in the short term but the long term, I think. Last question about who was my influence in Hadith study. Well, for me, it's kind of ironic because the teacher I studied with the most was an Egyptian scholar named Sheikh Osama Sayyid Mahmoud al-Azhari, who's only a few years older than me. And he is now I believe, the personal religious advisor to President Sisi in Egypt, which is difficult for me because I have political disagreements with that. In fact, almost all my teachers in Egypt are now close to the current government in Egypt. So, I learned a lot from him about Hadith. I learned a lot from him about Islamic thought in general. And people can disagree on other things. Really the books, I learned a lot from the books of the Ghumari family. Asad al-Ghumari, Ahmed bin Siddiq al-Ghumari died in 1960. Abdullah bin Siddiq al-Ghumari died in 1993. And from the books of al-Albani. These were very helpful for me.
Thank you. Walid, can I see Other hand, so just so that I can organize myself, see one behind. So got two, any other? Three. Any more? 4. 5? Somewhere over there? Oh, okay. Let's take 3. We've got approximately 15 minutes to end this week. So there's a question up there.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Shihab. I'm currently still a student. So you mentioned just now about the story of how the non-Muslim who wanted to join the war, but he was rejected several times because he's a non-Muslim. But in the end, he converted to Muslim. So my question is, what was the reaction of the Prophet and his Sahaba ever recorded when he actually wanted to join, when he actually wanted to convert to Islam just because he wanted to join the war? So what is the right way to react when we hear this kind of situation where people convert to Islam but for the wrong yet, or rather they don't feel for Islam yet, but they want to do it for other reasons? So yes, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jihan. Yes.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Thank you so much for your talk and for all of your writings. You have been an immense blessing to the Ummah, I think. My question is actually a comment. I'll try to phrase it as a question. You talked a lot about compromise, the idea of compromising, but you didn't really touch on the matter of who does the compromising or the negotiations. I'll give a simple example. For instance, there was an uproar with regards to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf with his comments about the Muslim Brotherhood. But I think most Muslims are willing to sort of let that go because it was Sheikh Hamza who has a proven track record of defending Muslims doing that. If it was some other American sheikh, shall not be named, maybe some Muslims will not be as forgiving. So they may say the same things at a particular point in time, they may believe the same things, but they may generate different reactions because of their track records. And when it comes to negotiations, and if the Muslim public sees that all that we have seen in public is compromise after compromise after compromise and excuse after excuse after excuse, nothing that appeals to the logic nor the emotions, then it is not unreasonable to think that the Muslim community will not accept the compromise. So my question is, do you think that the persons who do the negotiations with regards to compromise, they matter as well? Matter more, in fact,
very good question. Very good question.
Okay. So it's about compromises. It's about compromise, not cooperation. This is some hand. Yeah, up there. Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Jishan. I'm an associate from SUSS. I've got a question to do with history. You mentioned earlier that, about what I at least understood as a Nietzschean idea of history, being critical, the critical version of history, selecting things that can be of benefit to us and advantageous to the Ummah. I was curious about how we can use, say, the Ottoman Empire, history of the Seljuks, and so on and so forth, the great history of Islamic civilizations, and how we can use that through the Hadith and the Quran, and to help us understand the situation we are in right now. That's the first part. And the second part, quickly, is the issue of urf or culture that's specific to regions. How will that actually influence the idea of compromise? Thank you.
Yes, can I have for Madame MC? Tuti.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Just a quick question. Could you share from your study of the Hadith on how to deal with intra-faith issues, on overcoming petty differences or disputes, for example, between Salafis and Sufis, or even ethnic differences, for the greater good, which is exceptionally critical in this day and age. Was I talking too fast?
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay, we'll take these 3 questions, and then we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so I'll just try to do this quickly. Your question about the reaction of the Prophet and the companions, I don't think in any version of that hadith that I mentioned that there's any reaction noted. But I would say that your question is a very dangerous question. Very dangerous question because when the Usama bin Zayd was about to kill an unbeliever in battle, and he said, La ilaha illallah Rasulullah, and then the Prophet, Usama bin Zayd killed him anyway, and then he told the Prophet about this. What did the Prophet say to him? He said, Usama bin Zayd, he was just saying that to save his life. And the Prophet asked him, did you cut open his heart? See? So the bottom line is that, especially the early, the Ahl al-Sufra, for example, a lot of the early Muslim converts were basically, for all evident purposes, poor people who did it for the food. I mean, that's what we might say today. We might say that this guy did it for the money, this guy did it for that. But as far as I understand our tradition, we do not look into people's intentions. That's the principle is, we've been commanded to deal with the outward. God deals with what's in people's hearts. If someone says they're Muslim, then we believe them until they're not Muslim, right? And so certainly we can try and cultivate proper intention in our hearts. We can try and encourage other people to have the proper intention in their hearts. But things get really dicey when you start saying this guy became Muslim for the wrong reason. Let's say he did become Muslim to make money, but then 5 minutes later, God put inspiration in his heart to serve God for higher purposes. Maybe he learned that a day later, or 2 weeks later, or a month later. Do we want to sort of forego or foreclose that possibility because we've decided their initial decision was not done for the proper reason, in our opinion? This question about who negotiates is a great question, and I see kind of 2 aspects or 2 facets of it. One is really just the sort of there's the whole only Nixon can go to China example we use in the U.S., which is if you're a career anti-communist and then you go and talk to communists, no one's going to say you've become a softie. And so I think that's we have to be aware of that. If somebody can build up credibility on a question, and then that credibility can protect them against the accusation that they're compromising or that they're not sincere. Someone can. I remember one time I gave a lecture at a mosque, and I talked actually about urf and custom and all this stuff, and I gave lots of examples. And then the imam, who's Egyptian American, came up to me and said, I could never have said any of that. I'm so happy you said that. And I said, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you're a white guy. I said, I don't understand. He's like, well, you can say, you can criticize, American culture. You can criticize liberalism, all this stuff. I can't do that. I'll get called like a terrorist or something. So people have different. If I said, look, I don't give talks about hijab, because if I give talks about hijab, you know what's going to happen to me? There's going to be I'm going to be swinging on some flagpole or something in little pieces, right? Women talk about that issue. So people can talk about certain things, and people should talk about certain things. Other people can't and shouldn't. But the other thing you brought up, which I think is extremely important, is the issue of trust. A lot of the issue of the relationship between a community and, let's say, a government hinges on how much trust that community has in its leaders. If you have people who have a long history in that community, of serving that community, of being part of that community, of understanding its concerns, understanding its differences, its disagreements internally, and people trust that leader can then go and negotiate and deal with things, and people are going to give that person a lot of charity and a lot of credit. If somebody is a Muslim who's just become a professional Muslim in order to get paid because the US government is now giving all these grants to do countering violent extremism, and this person has no history in the Muslim community, and they're just doing this to make a buck, that person's not going to have any credibility in the Muslim community, right? And is going to be justifiably criticized for that. So I think you could have two people doing exactly the same thing, making exactly the same compromise, and one person, people would say, look, we trust this person, we know they're not doing it for their own benefit, we know they're doing it with best intentions. We might disagree with them, some of us, but we'll at least have a discussion and we'll take their opinion seriously. Other people who don't have that trust and that capital, that social capital, are not going to have that trust from the community. The question about what we can learn about history, I think what we can learn from history is what I find interesting, because I'm very interested in history of law, right, is to see how much, where were those lines, where were the red lines in the past? Where did ulama or judges say to a ruler or government or to a popular movement, no, we're not going to compromise on this, or no, this is where we're going to draw the line? Where were they going to be flexible? How much discretion did they give to a government? And that I find very interesting, because it's a lot of times what you see is very different from what you'd expect. And I think that's extremely useful. I recently wrote an article on apostasy that deals with this, talking about this is something that people usually, in my opinion, people usually think is just a hard and fast law, like a hadud law. But if you look not only in the life of the Prophet, but in the companions and the successors and in Muslim states throughout history, what you see is this issue of how you deal with apostasy is essentially a policy decision. What is going to be the best interest given our objectives, right? Then orf and compromise, and that's one of the major, the five qawa'id al-kubra, the five great maxims of legal law one is that al-'ada muhakkama, or another version, 'ada muhakkima. Custom is probative. Custom is empowered. And in fact, in vast areas of Islamic law, whether it's marriage, divorce, contracts, conditions, expectations of reasonable action, expectations of liability and responsibility, all these things are just directly come from custom, from how do people act in one place or another, what do they expect? And so what you see is not only tremendous variety within, let's say, a school of law based on adjusting to orf on these areas where orf is, custom is definitive, but also that if orf is really pressing, that not only might people pick from a non-main opinion in their madhab, they might actually go outside the madhab. And you see this for example, in North Africa with Berber tribes in these things called alwah, these tablets, these agreements that different governments in what's now Morocco and Algeria came these agreements with Berber tribes, where they would say, for example, okay, we accept that you're going to punish someone drinking by burning their house down, or something like that. And they would go and say, well, this is not opinion in the Maliki school, but there's some other opinion in another school of law, and because this is your custom, and because it's not violating the Sharia, it's not going outside the lines of the Sharia, we're going to accept it because we can find some basis for it in another school. So you see tremendous willingness by Muslim scholars and judges to, if the urf is really strong, they take it. But of course the problem is that, that you can't accept something that is totally contradictory or unacceptable in Islam whatsoever. I mean, America, people like to drink alcohol, especially in colleges. I can't say, well, the urf here is that alcohol is okay, so yeah, no, it's okay to drink. If somebody says, hey, professor, I want to become Muslim, but I really like drinking, can I keep drinking? I'll say, no, you can't, but I'm not going to tell him that he's not Muslim if he does drink. And instead of just, getting really mad at him and stuff like this, maybe I'll try and convince him over time, like, look how much money you're spending on this, how many more bars are you going to go to, is this really the meaning of your life, and things like that. Maybe in a year he stops drinking. So I'm not going to compromise on something I can't compromise on, but I'm also not going to push him away. I'm going to try and educate him in a way that is helpful to him. And the last thing about how do Muslims overcome intra-Muslim disputes like Salafis and Sufis, look, no one is going to win that fight, right? I mean, it's not like I'm going to sit here and debate someone on tawassul and then like I'm going to come up with some argument no one's ever come up with before. Both sides have these mountains of evidence, and I'd say what I would really try and emphasize is, look, and this is where I think compassion is really important, and there's endless articles, every week there's articles about the polarization in politics in America, the polarization of politics in Britain, the polarization of politics in Europe, and that people, once you load an issue with all meaning, right? Once you make an issue into a moral issue, once you make an issue into it's either you're a loyal person or a traitor, right? It becomes impossible to sit with the person anymore, right? So, let's say a lot of Democrats and Republicans in America just can't even stand to be around each other because they view the other person's positions as so bad that they couldn't possibly be a good person if they had this position. And once you come to that conclusion, it's almost, it prevents, it makes it impossible to just cooperate on anything or to have any kind of relationship. And I think one of the really inspirational elements of Islamic tradition and the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet for me is that the Quran and the Prophet's Sunnah make it very clear what is good for human beings. What human beings were created to do is to worship God, right? And here is a message and a teacher who's going to tell you how to do that. But, and this is what's astounding, that if you want to reject that, that's fine. You can be a Christian and reject Islam and continue to live under Muslim rule, and Muslims will allow you to continue practicing your religion. They will facilitate it. They will allow you to build churches and repair churches. They will even allow you to raise pigs and drink wine, do things that Muslims find disgusting and destructive. What I find really inspirational about this is that what it means is that Muslims are basically saying, we completely disagree with your vision of the world and of right and wrong and of the meaning of life, but we're still going to have a relationship with you. We're still going to protect you. And that if people can, if what you do is you realize that you have, if a Muslim, let's say, scholar who totally disagrees with you, who's a Sufi, who does always asking some saint to help them as they come to, Ahmed the Salafi, who thinks that's bid'ah. If my treatment of that person isn't based on my liking or not liking of their beliefs, but on the fact that I have an obligation of hospitality. I have to bring them into my house. I have to sit and talk to them. I have to be kind of them. I have to offer them food. It's no longer about how I feel. It's about the fact that I have obligations towards them. Taking things, in a more formalistic sense and saying, we have obligations to treat each other in a decent way that are not a function of whether we think someone else is right or wrong. Then you have some capacity to maintain relationships and dialogue. If you just say that, someone's entire existence and their total worth in this world is based on whether or not I agree with them or not, and there's no other structure that underlies that, then you aren't going to have a possibility for dialogue and agreement, and potential agreement.
Thank you very much. Just a brief comment. I cannot, but this make a brief comment. I think knowledge does play a great deal here. Try to appreciate diversity, try to appreciate the others. Often it is our ignorance of the others, our ignorance of the huge possibilities and options provided before us. So much so we are focused only at a small area. So knowledge does play a role, but I also think that, and I cannot emphasize enough, the importance of the idea of rahmah and mercy. We need to talk about it more, especially in light of the increasingly diverse Singapore Muslim community in the world. That feeling, and even a response to a sister who asked about a compass, I think it's very typical of Singaporeans asking for framework and SOP, a compass and place. I think it's very tough to develop such thing. But the hadith that says "Fastafti qalbak," I thought is very profound, and therefore we need to really develop qalbak, your heart, your conscience, for you to be able to make that that decision. Eventually you may err or you may make a mistake, but no, it's something out of that conscious. Unfortunately, Prof. Jonathan Brown has a flight to catch tonight. Has a long journey, 20 hours, 25 hours journey back to BC. He has a flight to catch. We'll go straight to the airport from Muis. But I
notice with all my comments that I might be back. You might have to take me back in.
And this is what I want to congratulate the audience here. You have been very tremendous. You've been very participative. You keep Jonathan Brown awake and give the best. However, you still fail to convince him to postpone his flight. So that I'm unable to do that because his wife is expecting him to go at BC. So thank you everyone for the time and also for your contribution. I want to apologize on behalf of Jonathan Brown and myself for any shortcomings. So without further ado, I'll get
Thank you everyone. Thank you Associate Professor Jonathan Brown and Dr. Hanan. It was indeed an enlightening talk and a refreshing discussion. May we all benefit from the lecture and exchange of ideas. If I may request to move, don't go anywhere. It is my pleasure now to invite President of Muis, Ambassador Haji Muhammad Alami Musa, and Chief Executive of Muis, Haji Abdul Razak Marika, to present a token of appreciation to Associate Professor Jonathan Brown. We are presenting Dr. Brown with an orchid plate representing Singapore's national flower, the Vanda Miss Joachim. This hybrid cultivar was chosen as our national flower, particularly for its vibrant colours, hardiness, resilience, qualities reflecting the Singapore spirit. Thank you, gentlemen. You may return to your seats. Once again, thank you to Ambassador Haji Muhammad Alami Musa and CE Haji Abdul Razak Marika. A warm thank you again to Associate Professor Jonathan Brown for the brilliant talk. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program. May we leave tonight's event feeling enlightened with a better understanding of the role of Islam and other faith traditions in shaping the common good that benefits all humanity. If you have enjoyed the session and wish to be part of our future engagements, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram for updates. Alternatively, you can fill your contact details in the feedback form if you wish to join our mailing list. Your feedback is very important to us and we appreciate if you could take some time to fill it out. Our ushers are around to assist you. Once again, this is the final time. Thank you very much for being part of this event and may we meet again in the near future. I wish you a very good night and have a pleasant journey home. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.